What you get when a sitting president sets foot in one of America's most viewed morning programs, anticipating softballs and gets instead ambushed with the type of questioning that makes even the most experienced politicians perspire. What we saw wasn't another celebrity gone rogue interview. This was a masterclass in tension, ego, and the precise moment when the control of a conversation turned so sharply that it culminated in an empty seat and a studio full of gaping crew members. Before we get to this, remember to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below letting me know what you think about how this whole scenario played out. Trust me, you're going to have opinions. So let's paint the picture. The Today's Show, Studio 1A at Rockefeller Center. It's a Tuesday morning and the atmosphere in the building is altered. You can sense it. When a president, any president, decides to sit down for a live TV interview, the whole shebang goes into high gear. Security is omnipresent. Producers are making their way through questions for the 15th time. Hair and makeup are on standby. And somewhere amidst all that orchestrated madness, Craig Melvin is sitting in his chair, reviewing his notes one final time. Now, Craig Melvin is no pushover. He's been with NBC for decades, climbed the ranks from local news, reported on everything from natural disasters to political scandals. He's the type of reporter who does his research, who has the next question coming out while you still have the first one in your mouth. But even for a man with his experience, this is new. This is the President of the United States, and not just any president. This is Donald Trump, a man who has spent years perfecting the art of manipulation through the media, who approaches interviews as he would a bout of boxing, and who has stormed out of more than a few interviews when he did not get his way. The interview is to begin at 8:15, immediately after the commercial break. Trump shows up right on time, much to the surprise of some because punctuality is not always his forte. He is dressed in a black suit, red tie, the uniform. His hair is immaculate, or at least as immaculate as it ever gets. He's smiling, greeting crew members with a handshake, small talk. This is his comfort zone. Cameras, lights, an audience at home. He's done this 1,000 times. Craig rises to welcome him. They shake hands, exchange greetings. The mics are attached. The lighting is tweaked. Someone counts down from 10, and then they're on the air. Craig smiles, welcomes back the viewers, introduces his guest. The president gets comfy in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, leaning back a bit. Body language analysts would later have a ball with this scene, parsing every movement, every micro-expression. But it simply appears to be a man who's at ease, possibly too at ease. The first couple of questions are as you would expect. Craig inquires about new legislative priorities, about economic statistics, about foreign policy. Trump responds as he always does, deflecting from details, speaking in generalities, with the use of terms such as, many people are saying, and everyone knows. It's old hat for both of them. Craig gently rebuts a few points, requests clarification now and again, but not anything to make someone watching think that this interview is going to be other than typical political theater. And then something changes. Craig leans forward slightly, fiddles with his papers, and his demeanor does too. Not dramatically, not in a way to make Trump first of all defensive, but enough that you, if you were listening carefully, would recognize he's shifting ground now, away from policy, and into more personal, more pointed territory. Craig mentions the recent polling figures, the ones that place trust in government institutions at all-time lows. He poses it tactfully, not as an attack but as an observation. He says something like, Mr. President, a lot of Americans are sitting in Washington right now and they're upset. They feel that they're not being given straight answers. What do you have to say about that? Trump never misses a beat. He begins to speak of disinformation, of how the media twists it all around, of how he's the most open president in history. It's a response he has given 100 times. But Craig presses on. He interrupts, which is dangerous when you're interviewing a president, particularly this one. He tells him, with all due respect, sir, I'm not speaking of the press at the moment. I'm speaking of trust. And he gives him specific instances, the times when the administration has promised one thing and done another. When numbers didn't tally, when explanations shifted. You can watch Trump's face shift. The smile gets slightly narrower. He uncrosses his legs, sits up straighter. He begins to answer, but Craig continues, piling questions upon questions. Not aggressively, but dogged, systematic. He's well rehearsed for this. Has proof for all that he's claiming. Trump attempts to divert, begins to speak of his achievements, of how the economy is greater than it's ever been, of how other presidents have done much worse. But Craig is not falling for it. He keeps bringing the conversation back time and again to the question in hand, why should Americans believe what they're being told by this administration? And this is where it becomes interesting. Trump ceases attempting to provide an answer to the question and begins instead to interrogate Craig. He asks him whether he has been speaking to some individuals, suggests that the direction of questioning has been fed to him by political rivals. He basically tells him, "Come on, Craig. You're a smart guy. You understand this is a setup. Who's been whispering in your ear?" Craig answers peacefully, tells him nobody has been in his ear. That these are questions he's posing because they're questions Americans are wondering about. And then he goes and does something that in retrospect probably was the moment that set the rest of the interview in motion. He asks Trump outright, "Can you name one time in the last year when you've admitted you were wrong about something? Just one time?" The studio falls silent. Even crew members who are accustomed to turning off for these bits are tuned in because this is not a policy issue. This is not legislation or approval ratings. This is personal. It is about ego and responsibility and all of the things that Trump has gone his whole public career in order to avoid. Trump glares at Craig for a second. His jaw clamps shut and then he begins to talk, but rather than responding to the question, he attacks Craig personally. He mentions Craig's career, implies that he would not be employed if it were not for diversity programs. Suggests that he's not qualified to be questioning in this way. It's nasty and everybody who's watching knows it. Craig doesn't blink. He allows Trump to have his say. Wait a moment. And then speaks very quietly, "That's not an answer to the question, sir." And Trump explodes. Not physically, not in a shrieking manner, but in the manner in which you can see someone has entirely lost control of their decorum. He begins talking over Craig, his volume increasing, saying this is precisely what's wrong with the press, that he arrived here in good faith, and he's getting ambushed, that this is a shame. He points at Craig, then at the camera, then at Craig again. Craig attempts to take control again, says that they can change the subject, but Trump is finished. He leans over and snatches his microphone away, the sound of it making a loud pop across the audio system. He stands, looks straight into the camera, and states, "This is why nobody trusts you people." Then he just walks away from the set. The camera lingers on Craig for a moment, and you can see him trying to process what just occurred. He pauses, glances up at the camera, and says something like, "We're going to take a little break." His tone is steady, but you can hear the adrenaline coursing beneath it. And then they cut to ads. The commercial break is 3 minutes and 40 seconds. In television time, that's an eternity. Back in the control room, producers are losing their minds. The director is yelling into headsets attempting to determine whether they go back live, whether they reference what just occurred, whether they act like it never occurred and jump into the cooking segment. No one has a playbook for this because this does not occur. Presidents do not walk off sets. Even the obstinate ones, even the media-hating ones, they sit through it. They know the optics. They know that walking off seems cowardly, seems guilty, seems like you can't cope with pressure. But Trump isn't in the control booth hearing producers freak out. He's in the green room with Secret Service and his own staff. And from what observers there say, he's still going, still spry, still angry. His press secretary is attempting to placate him, telling him they can spin it, make it a tale of media bias, about ambush journalism. But Trump doesn't care about spin at the moment. He needs validation. He needs everyone around him to confirm that he did the right thing in exiting, that Craig overstepped, that this was an ambush. Back on set, meanwhile, Craig is in his chair during the commercial break, and he's not budging. His co-hosts have run over. Savannah Guthrie has arrived. Hoda Kotb has arrived. They're speaking with him softly, inquiring as to whether he is all right. He shakes his head, assures them he's okay, but his hands do the tremble. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline dump that follows something like that. He's been in this business long enough to understand that what just occurred is going to set a lot of people's perception of him. For better or for worse, the country is going to be split in half deciding whether he's a hero who has finally asked the hard questions. Or if he ambushed a sitting president. There isn't any middle anymore. Stage manager is starting the countdown. 30 seconds to air. Craig straightens out his notes although he won't be referring to them. Savannah and Hod return to their places. The lights rise again and they live again. Craig addresses the camera and is calm, professional. He says, "We're back. As you just saw, President Trump has decided to end our interview. We want to be clear about what happened here. We asked questions that we believe are important for the American people to hear, answered. The president disagreed with our approach and chose to leave. We respect his right to do that. It's a careful statement, threading the needle between defending the journalism and not escalating the situation further." But then Craig does something that surprises even his own producers. He doesn't move on to the next segment. Instead, he continues talking about the interview, walking through some of the questions he asked, providing context for viewers who might have tuned in late. He shows clips not to embarrass Trump, but to demonstrate that these weren't gotcha questions, that they were based on public statements and documented facts. And while this is happening, something else is happening behind the scenes. Trump hasn't left the building. He's still backstage. And according to multiple sources, he's watching the broadcast on a monitor and he's getting angrier because Craig isn't backing down. Craig isn't apologizing. Craig is doubling down. And in Trump's world, that's a challenge that can't go unanswered. His team is begging him to leave, to get in the car, to let them handle the response through official channels. But Trump has never been good at walking away from a fight, especially not when he thinks he's losing the narrative. So, he makes a decision that everyone around him knows is a terrible idea. He tells them he's going back on set. The Secret Service has to scramble. The producers have to be notified. Craig, who's now moved on to a segment about upcoming fall fashion trends, gets a message in his earpiece. The president wants to come back. Do we let him? Now, this is where it gets complicated. From a journalistic standpoint, of course, you let him back. This is news happening in real time. This is a moment that people are going to be talking about for years, but from a practical standpoint, this could go very wrong very quickly. The interview already ended in a walk-off. What happens if round 2 was even worse? Craig makes the call. He says yes. They cut away from the fashion segment, apologize to the designer, who was halfway through explaining sustainable fabrics, and suddenly Trump is walking back onto the set. The studio audience, which has been sitting there in stunned silence, starts murmuring. Some people pull out their phones even though they're not supposed to. This is the kind of thing you need to record because even if it airs live, you want your own proof that you were there. Trump sits down, but he doesn't put the microphone back on. Someone from the crew has to come over and help him. And the whole time he's staring at Craig. Not in a friendly way, not even in a professional adversarial way. This is personal now. Craig welcomes him back. Says he's glad the president decided to continue the conversation. Trump immediately cuts him off. He says, "I didn't come back to continue anything. I returned because I'm not going to let you sit here and lie about what just transpired." Craig, to his credit, doesn't rise to it. He continues, "Mr. President, I haven't lied about anything. I reported exactly what occurred. You asked questions. I asked questions and then you left. Those are the facts." Trump leans in. He's doing the thing he does where he uses his body to attempt to intimidate, to fill up space. He says, "You set me up. You prepared those questions because you wanted to embarrass me. This was not journalism. This was a hit piece." And Craig at this moment makes a decision. He could back down, could apologize for tone, if not content, could attempt to kiss it off, but instead he matches Trump's energy. He says, "Mr. President, each of the questions that I asked you were from your own words and your own behavior. If the truth bothers you, that's not my issue. That is yours." The studio falls totally silent. Even the crew members who've been glancing at their phones, who've been half listening, everybody stops because you don't speak to a president this way. You don't tell a sitting president that he's out of sorts with the truth. It's the sort of moment that ruins careers or makes them. And it's no in between. Trump flushes red. He begins to react, but Craig continues. He continues, "You appeared on this program because you wanted to connect with our audience. This program is watched by millions of Americans each morning. They're teachers, nurses, construction workers, parents getting their kids off to school. They don't have the time for spin. They don't have the time for deflection. They want to know if the individual in charge of this country is being honest with them. And when I ask you a straightforward question, can you give me one instance when you've acknowledged being wrong? And you cannot respond. What did they tell him?" Trump stands up once more, but this time he does not leave. Instead, he points at Craig and states, "You want to know when I've been wrong? I'll tell you when I was wrong. I was wrong to come here. I was wrong to believe you'd treat me fairly. I was wrong to give you and this network the time of day." Craig answers quickly. "That's not an answer, sir. That's you angry that I'm asking the question." Trump's people are now physically attempting to interpose themselves between him and the camera. His press secretary is tugging on his arm. Secret Service agents are standing strategically but Trump pushes them away. He glares straight at the camera and tells us, "This is what the media does. They welcome you in. They assure you of a fair discussion, and then they pounce on you. They distort what you're saying. They take everything out of context. And then they pretend to be victims when you call them out." Craig Melvin is not a journalist. He's an activist with a TV show. Craig stands up now to they're both standing staring at each other over the tiny coffee table between them. Craig responds, "I'm a reporter asking questions. That's my job. If you can't take questions, perhaps you shouldn't be in public life." And that's it. That's the line. Trump walks off the set for the second time. And this time, everybody knows he's not returning. Craig remains there for a moment as Trump slips away through the doors of the studio. The camera is still with him, still running live to millions of people, and he must decide now what to do next. His producers are yelling in his ear, instructing him to go to commercial, cut away, give everyone a second to catch their breath. But Craig doesn't cut away. Rather, he gets back in his chair, breathes a little, and stares straight into the camera. He says, "I've been doing this job for a long time. I've interviewed presidents, senators, activists, criminals, heroes. I've covered hurricanes and elections and trials and celebrations. And I can honestly say I've never experienced anything quite like what you just witnessed. But I want to be very clear about something. My job isn't to make powerful people comfortable. My job is to ask questions on behalf of the people watching at home, and if those questions make someone angry, if they make someone walk off a set, that doesn't mean the questions were wrong. It means they were necessary." The control room is frantically trying to figure out what comes next. Do they stick with Craig? Do they bring in the other hosts? Do they acknowledge that the entire morning schedule has just been thrown out the window, but Craig is still talking? And at this point, the producers realize they need to just let him go. Let him work through this moment however he needs to. Craig continues. "For everyone watching who thinks I was too hard on the president, I understand. I respect your perspective, but I would ask you to consider this. If we can't ask our leaders tough questions, if we can't expect them to answer without walking away, then what kind of democracy are we really living in? This isn't about politics. This isn't about being on the left or the right. This is about accountability. It's about whether the most powerful person in the country can handle being challenged." Somewhere in a car that's now pulling away from Rockefeller Center, Trump is on his phone. He's already tweeting, already framing the narrative. The tweets are coming fast, calling Craig a third-rate journalist, calling NBC fake news, saying the interview was a disaster orchestrated by his enemies. His supporters are retweeting, adding their own commentary, some of it supportive, some of it threatening. Within minutes, Craig Melvin is trending on social media, and it's not all positive. Back in the studio, Savannah Guthrie has joined Craig on the couch. She's clearly shaken by what just happened, but she's also a professional, and she knows they need to keep the show moving. She asks Craig how he's feeling, and it's a genuine question, not a scripted one. Craig pauses, considers it, and says, "Honestly, I'm still processing, but I stand by every question I asked." The phones at NBC are ringing off the hook. Advertisers want to know what just happened. Affiliates are demanding statements. The network's legal team is reviewing the footage to make sure nothing actionable was said. The public relations department is drafting responses to the inevitable backlash. And in newsrooms across the country, producers are scrambling to book guests who can analyze what just happened, who can provide context, who can feed the 24-hour news cycle that's about to go into overdrive. But on the Today Show set, Craig and Savannah are doing something that feels almost radical in its simplicity. They're having a conversation, not a scripted segment, not a carefully produced moment, just two journalists talking about what it means to do this job when the stakes are this high. Savannah asks if he knew Trump might walk off. Craig admits he thought it was possible but hoped it wouldn't happen. She asks if he would do anything differently. He says no. The interview, or what's left of it, starts playing back on monitors throughout the building. Producers are already cutting together packages, creating highlight reels, pulling the most explosive moments. The clip of Trump ripping off his microphone the first time is going to be played on every news channel for the rest of the day. The moment where Craig said, "If the truth makes you uncomfortable, that's not my problem. That's yours." That's going to be on t-shirts and coffee mugs by tomorrow morning. The shot of them both standing facing each other like two fighters in a ring. That's going to be the thumbnail for every YouTube video dissecting this interview. Craig's phone, which he left in his dressing room, is exploding with messages. Colleagues congratulating him, friends asking if he's okay, family members worried about the threats that are inevitably coming. Network executives trying to figure out if they need to provide extra security, and mixed in with all of that, messages from people he's never met. Viewers who watched what happened and felt something. Some are thanking him for asking the questions they wish more journalists would ask. Some are furious, accusing him of ambushing a president, of being disrespectful, of having an agenda. On set, they finally moved on to the next segment. A health expert is talking about new research on sleep patterns, and it's so normal, so mundane compared to what just happened that it almost feels surreal. But that's live television. That's the nature of morning shows. You go from the most dramatic moment of your career to someone demonstrating the proper way to fluff a pillow, and you're expected to transition smoothly between the two. During the next commercial break, Craig finally gets a moment alone. He walks to the side of the set away from the cameras, and one of the producers asks him again if he's okay. He nods, but you can see it in his face. The weight of what just happened, the knowledge that his life just changed in a fundamental way. That clip is never going away. That moment is going to define him at least for a while, maybe forever. But there's also something else in his expression, something that looks like resolve, because he did what he came to do. He asked the questions. He didn't back down when it got uncomfortable. He didn't let power intimidate him into silence. Whether history judges him as brave or reckless, whether he becomes a hero to some and a villain to others, he can say that he did his job. The show continues. Hoda does a segment on holiday gift ideas. There's a musical performance from an up-and-coming artist. The weather is discussed, and through it all, Craig sits there participating when he needs to, smiling when appropriate, being the professional that he's always been. But everyone watching can see that something has shifted. You can't go through something like that and come out the other side unchanged. In the hours that follow, the analysis begins. Cable news channels bring in body language experts, psychologists, political strategists. Everyone has a theory about what Trump was really thinking, what Craig was really trying to accomplish. Some say Trump walked into a trap, others say Craig went too far, crossed a line from journalism into edit. The debates rage across social media, in office break rooms, at dinner tables. Everyone has an opinion about who was right and who was wrong. But here's what's interesting. In all the analysis, in all the hot takes and think pieces and Twitter threads, one thing becomes clear. People are talking. People who don't normally pay attention to morning show interviews are suddenly engaged. People who haven't thought about the relationship between the press and the presidency in years are having conversations about accountability and access and what journalism is supposed to be. And maybe that's the real story here. Not that a president walked off a set. Not that a journalist pushed too hard, but that for a few minutes on a Tuesday morning, everyone was paying attention. Everyone was watching two people have a real conversation, a real disagreement about things that actually matter. In an age of carefully controlled messaging and scripted interactions and PR-approved statements, there was something raw and unfiltered about what happened between Craig Melvin and Donald Trump. The rest of the Today Show goes off without incident. They wrap up at 9 o'clock. The crew starts breaking down the set and Craig heads to his dressing room. His phone is still blowing up. Network executives want to meet with him. His agent wants to talk strategy. The security team wants to brief him on the threats that have already come in. But for just a moment, he sits down in front of the mirror and lets himself breathe. He doesn't know yet that the clip will be viewed over 50 million times in the next 48 hours. He doesn't know that he'll be invited to speak at journalism conferences, that he'll be both praised and criticized by colleagues, that this moment will become a case study in media ethics classes. He doesn't know that Trump will continue to attack him on social media for weeks, or that a subset of Trump's base will make him a target. And he doesn't know that years from now, when people talk about the relationship between the press and this presidency, this interview will be one of the defining moments they reference. What he knows right now sitting in that dressing room is that he asked the questions he needed to ask. And when faced with the choice between backing down and standing his ground, he stood his ground. Whatever comes next, whatever the consequences, he can live with that. So, what do you think? Did Craig Melvin do the right thing by pushing Trump that hard? Or did he cross a line? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure you subscribe because trust me, we're going to have a lot more to talk about. This story isn't over. Not by a long shot.